Hi, so I'm Alizeh, and yeah, I'm one of the HIM's fifth years, and I'm just going to touch a little bit briefly on what it's been like for me being LGBTQ and being in an ethnic and religious minority. So I'm just going to start off by throwing some statistics your way about what it means to be a minority. In 2017, 93.2% of individuals identified as being heterosexual. This is in the UK. So if my maths is right, that's like 6.8% identified as being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or another non-straight sexual orientation. The statistics and sort of data on the transgender population is really not robust, but it's estimated that about 0.3 to 0.8% of the UK population is trans. The census in 2011, sort of moving on to ethnicity and religion, determined that 86% of the population of England and Wales identified as white, and then ethnic minority groups included Asians, so Pakistanis, Indian, Bangladesh, China. Those made up 7.5% of the population, and 3.3% of the population belonged to black ethnic groups. And then for religion, going off the same census, 60% of the population identified as Christian. Another quite big chunk, so about 26, identified with no religious faith. Muslims, like myself, made up 4.4% of the population, and smaller groups sort of included Hindus, Sikhs, and Jews. I just wanted to throw those numbers out there because I think often, sort of being LGBTQ, those of you that are, you know you're a minority, but you don't really, it's hard to visualize sort of unless you see your pie charts or your graphs or like you hear the numbers. You don't really know what it means to be an actual minority. And then for people like myself who are minorities within minorities, so I'm LGBTQ, but I'm also Pakistani and I'm also Muslim, you can imagine finding other people that identify with those same three groups the way that I do. It's me and maybe a couple hundred other people in the UK, like it's very few. And we all know that minorities face a lot of adversity, even within healthcare. I think one of the Stonewall studies showed that 1 in 4 LGBTQ people faced first-hand discrimination whilst trying to access healthcare. It's similar for ethnic minorities and religious minorities. We all know about sort of barriers to seeking healthcare, healthcare inequalities, healthcare inequity. The list goes on, and whilst my talk isn't really about that today, some of the wider issues that I am going to talk about do contribute to poor healthcare outcomes and really do propagate that sort of thing. So just food for thought as I go on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the disconnect that a lot of people feel when you belong to multiple small identity groups, so being LGBTQ and being religious, for example. I'll talk about why that affects visibility in individuals like myself and why I think representation is really important. Goes without saying, but I'll explain it. So dissonance. If we take religion, for example, there's sort of this historical and even very current question about, can I be religious and gay? To me, the answer is yes, I think I do both. But to a lot of people on the outside looking in, the answer is no. To a lot of people within the LGBTQ community, the answer is no. I have a friend that is very Muslim. She wears a headscarf, she wears a hijab, she dresses very modest, but she's also very gay. And she is. And to a lot of people within the LGBT community, I've heard this be said to her face. She gets told, oh, I just didn't think you could be gay. Or, oh, it's your headscarf, it makes me think you're straight. And that's really hurtful. It's really hurtful. I think when you belong to a religious minority and you're LGBTQ, often your faith groups disregard who you are. And then you turn to the LGBT community for a safe space, and even they disregard who you are. And you're left sort of feeling as if you don't belong anywhere. And it's a similar thing for ethnic minorities. The Stonewall study that I mentioned earlier said that 61% of black individuals had faced discrimination from within the wider LGBTQ community. That's a community that's supposed to be safe and inclusive. Like, those are alarming numbers. And I just think this dissonance with being LGBTQ and being an ethnic minority or a religious minority, it leaves groups that are already so marginalized, and it just makes them feel even more left out and even more isolated. Even myself, I'm brown-skinned, and so many times if in conversation it comes up that I'm pansexual, or that I'll be talking about my ex-girlfriend or something, and people will immediately, strangers will immediately ask, oh, so what do your parents think about that? And I just think I have so many white queer friends that would never get asked that question. And yet, because to other people, the way that I look doesn't connect with who I am, I get asked these intrusive and personal questions that I really don't see other people being asked. And yeah, so that dissonance, I think, leads to sort of people feeling unheard and feeling alone and invisible, and sort of invalidates their identity. And that in itself can create mental health problems, so many mental health problems. But more than that, it contributes, like I mentioned earlier, to this, to barriers to seeking healthcare. It contributes to people feeling not only having mental health problems, but them not being able to sort out their physical health problems. And that is, in a nutshell, why I think representation is so important. It can answer so many questions that I used to have for myself when I was younger and discovering who I was. I think representation means that people that otherwise might feel shoved to the bottom of the pile or feel invalidated or feel alone will actually be able to see a reflection of themselves and know that they are valid and they do exist. And this isn't really representation that I expect yet from the wider mainstream media. We've got a long way to go with them. But even representation just within the LGBTQ community. So UK Black Pride, they do, I think, yearly marches for the UK Black LGBTQ community. And they celebrate being Black and LGBTQ. They don't question it. And then Iman over there on the bottom right is a Muslim charity that I work with on and off that provides a safe space for LGBTQ Muslims. And once again, it means that we're celebrated and we're not like told that we don't exist. And then that's just a really cute little comic for my friend because she wears a hijab and she's Muslim and she's LGBTQ, and I just thought it was really cute. And yeah, in a nutshell, that's that. Things we can do. Be open. Be aware of everybody around you. Be actively inclusive. Encourage representation. Stand up for others that are being discriminated against, whether that's in the workspace, whether that's on the street. Just stand up for people. And represent yourself also. Like, those of you working in hospitals, wear your rainbow lanyard if infection control are okay with it. Like, question. But, you know, just be who you are. And yeah, just especially during this month, be a little bit more open and a little bit more inclusive to everyone so that we can celebrate being LGBTQ as a spectrum of everybody and not just majorities. Thank you.